This podcast is made possible through donations from listeners like you and our partners at Tallman Equipment. They pride themselves on equipping their customers with the tools they need to get the job done right. They are dedicated to set the standard for quality, convenience, and reliability. At Tallman, your opinion is important to them. Rate and review any product or tool you've used on their new website at tallmanequipment.com. Line 11 Clothing Company, making apparel for their first responders with a positive message to patriots that you can be proud of. A proceed of the cost goes to helping our foundation ignite the fire for father engagement. Give them a follow at Line 11 Clothing on Instagram. You could also find them or email them at line11clothing@yahoo.com. And last but not least, Monzingo Knives. Each knife is created with craftsmanship that only a tradesman could provide. Find them on Instagram at Monzingo Knives and get your American-made Monzingo knife today. Welcome to the Show Up Dad podcast. This is a podcast for hardworking fathers. At the Show Up Dad, we recognize that fathers providing for their children is certainly important. But when men truly understand their unique role and gain the knowledge and skills to be great fathers, they can transform and impact future generations. Our guest today is none other than John Finch. John is the founder of the Father Effect Ministries. He is also the creator and storyteller of the Father Effect movie and book. His mission is to help men become the fathers God created them to be and build a great legacy for the generations that follow them. He has been married for 25 years to his wife, Michelle, and has 3 amazing daughters, Ellie, Brooke, and Sydney. Welcome to the show, John. Such a pleasure to have you on here, brother.
Thanks for having me, brother. I look forward to it, man. This is something I've been looking forward to for a few days here.
Absolutely, man. It's such an honor to finally get hold of you and finally get you on here. Can I have you give our listeners a brief history of your family of origin, your father, your mother, and growing up a little bit, John, if you don't mind?
You bet. So a big part of my story is really learning more about my father and how he grew up and his origins. You know, my dad committed suicide on April 10th, 1979, and I was 11 years old. And that was obviously an event that just tragically transformed my life. And so for 30 years after that, I just kind of wandered through this world lost, not knowing that I had what it takes to be a man, not getting that affirmation and confirmation from a father. And so I literally just bought into everything that the world says you need to be as a man. And it was about 10 years ago that after that 30-year run of just being angry and really had this wound of abandonment and betrayal because of my dad, I was angry at him because he left me, and I was angry at God because God allowed him to leave me. That was my thinking. Mm-hmm. And so in the midst of all that, for 30 years, I just was angry, and I medicated that anger with alcohol. Mm-hmm. I was a traveling salesman, had an unlimited expense account, was traveling all over the country, and so I was this different guy on the road than I was at home. I was that guy at home where just doing the best I can to pretend to be somebody that I really wasn't, pretend to be this good Christian guy who, went to church every Sunday and had this amazing family. And the truth was I was covering up a lot and hiding from a lot. So about 10 years ago, God just took me to this place of brokenness, bro, and it's a place he had to take me because I was having too much fun running from him. Mm-hmm. And in the midst of that, he just really showed me that, it was one sentence, it was one thing. It was, how could I be so bitter, resentful, and angry towards a man who didn't know how to be a father? Mm-hmm. And it was in the journey that he started me on in trying to learn more about my dad and kind of connect the dots and figure out why he was so messed up and why he suffered from depression. And the more I learned, his mom had 5 different husbands. He never had a stable father figure. The more I learned, the more compassion God gave me for my father. Mm-hmm. And eventually that anger turned into really a compassion. And when God showed me ultimately forgiveness for my father, it radically changed my life as a man, husband, and father. And so the part that I think everyone needs to understand, and this is something that was really a pivotal moment for me, mm-hmm. is my dad could not give what he did not have.
Yes.
And for me, that was it. Understanding and coming to realize that that was the game changer for me. And again, that's what helped turn that anger into compassion. And now I think of my father with nothing but love, because of the wounded and flawed man that he was.
Mm-hmm. I think once we look at our fathers through that lens, like you did, we're able to find that compassion that we need to. You know what I mean? That anger, that resentment, it just eats at you as a man.
It,
you know?
yeah, and you know what? It is that kind of that adage of, it's like, you drinking poison expecting someone else to feel the pain, right? It was the unforgiveness was killing me. And it was, the anger was seeping out in every aspect of my life, with my family, with my kids, with my wife. I mean, I was a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all a result of this abandonment and betrayal that I felt from my father.
No, and so many fathers out there can just share with the same testaments. You know what I mean? This resonates with so many of us out there. I mean, even with myself, with my father. My father was always there, right? But he was the distant dad. He was the checked out dad, and he was abusive. By today's standards, it'd be considered abusive, and I always couldn't understand at all. Here's this man who loves me, but does the things that he does. You know what I mean? And that was hurtful. That was hurtful to see that. But like you said, you have to get past. You have to see them through a different lens and see that they could only give you what they got. You know what I mean? And if they didn't get what you're looking for, then you're not going to receive that from them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. A big piece too, in the journey that I was on in making the movie and writing the book was. Mm-hmm. Understanding also, and this is what every man needs to understand, mm-hmm. is this principle of transference. So many men, they take what their earthly father is like to them, and they automatically transfer that to what their heavenly father is like. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that kind of, if it's that distant, aloof dad who just, you got to go to him if you really need him, mm-hmm. then you automatically put that image of your earthly father, because it is your first introduction to what a father is. Mm-hmm. You automatically think God's that same way. And so if it's the over military disciplined style dad who's, you do this, you do that, just because I said so, and blah blah blah, mm-hmm. then you think God's kind of the same way. I mean, the thing I've struggled for many years is just thinking God's this guy up there, a judge with a gavel, mm-hmm. and he's just waiting to pound me. He's just waiting
right.
to punish me next time. And so understanding that the way I love my wife, mm-hmm. right, is the way my girls, my 3 daughters, are going to expect to be loved by a husband. Mm-hmm. And if I'm verbally or physically abusive in any way, or just the body language, the tone I use, I walk in a different awareness now because of what I've been through and what I've seen. Mm-hmm. And now I'm doing things differently, and mm-hmm. helping, hopefully and prayerfully helping them see that I'm not perfect. They mm-hmm. know it, but that I'm doing the very best I can as a father and a husband to give them that example of what that godly man and husband looks like.
Mm-hmm. And once again, it's just such a powerful testimony, John. It truly is, for you to be able to open up and share with our audience about your father, his death and how it affected you. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the earliest memories? Because I know you lost your father when you were 11. So what are some of the earliest memories of your father, and what was he like?
Well, it's interesting. When God started me on this journey, I broke down. Was like, man, I got to get a professional. I got to go see a counselor, a Christian counselor. So I found a guy, and the dude was just so solid. Mm-hmm. He loved me when I needed it. He also encouraged me, called me on my bluff, when I was trying to beat around the bush or not go there. And he really helped walk me through these doors that I would have never walked through if it wasn't for him. And I believe God brings those people into our lives, right? I needed that guide to help me kind of through the journey. And he asked me that question in one of the sessions, and it hit me, and I remember literally getting emotional and crying
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't have any memories of my father. The only, as far as one-on-one doing fishing or hunting or throwing a baseball, any of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
the only memory I had was crawling up in his lap as a little boy, and just he was a smoker, rolled his own cigarettes, Prince Albert. I mean, and he had holes in his shirt from just ashes falling down. And I remember just crawling up in his arms and sitting. He would sit in a chair, and I'd crawl up in his arms, and just that smell.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that smell of what I thought a man was supposed to smell like. You know, a combination of
Yeah.
probably cigarettes, beer, and sweat, and whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
And so, really, that was another moment for me in counseling that I was like, wow, I have no memories of my father other than just that. And so, you know, he was gone a lot. Even when he was alive, he was gone a lot, wasn't really there emotionally or physically. And so that was something that, you know, I had to come to understand and figure out how to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things I always ask our guests about their dads is, was your father a show me dad or a tell me dad? I know that's it's kind of an awkward question, but you know, it's one I always like to try to figure out, you know what I mean, and ask the question about that.
You know, so what's interesting about that, and again, it's
Mm-hmm.
the generational thing, right,
Mm-hmm.
of how we grew up and our normal. And as dysfunctional as our normal might be, it is our normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the midst of all, what I remember growing up, and I remember him saying this,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope this answers the question, but I remember him saying little kids are supposed to be seen and not heard.
Hmm.
And that has stuck with me all these many years. So I don't remember, again, because I don't have a lot of memories of him other than
Mm-hmm.
crawling up in his lap, but I believe he was probably maybe a combination of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Two types of dads, but it's just interesting because I remember thinking, wow, even as a young man, that seems pretty crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, little kids are to be seen and not heard. Even as a young man, I just remember thinking that really hurt me deeply that he would continue to say that when me as a young boy was, I'm sure, craving attention and affirmation from him, and obviously I wasn't getting it from him.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's interesting that you said that, because that's a saying we use in the line trade. You know, me being a lineman, we used to always tell our apprentices, "You're to be seen and not heard. You know, you're from the neck up. That's it. You know, learn how to use that shovel. Don't talk. Don't nothing. Just for the first 6 months, you just learn how to use that shovel. That's it. You know." And I remember as a young boy, the children were never allowed around the table where the adults were talking, ever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were to be outside. You know, if the adults got together around a big table, started talking, doing their adult thing, you better not even show your face around that table. You know?
Yeah.
And that just must be like a generational thing where, you know, according to the time and stuff like that and everything else, you know what I mean? That just, you know, I think that's changed a lot now, you know, but I think it's pretty interesting, you know?
Yeah, and you know, back to the generational thing, and this kind of goes to that point I mentioned about kind of the normal.
Mm-hmm.
We live what was normal in our house growing up. We got to interview a prison inmate named Jose
Mm-hmm.
in Houston for the movie, and I remember him telling this story, and as extreme as it may seem to some,
Mm-hmm.
it drives home this point that, you know, this young man said, man, John, when I was 10, 11 years old, my mom would send me down the street to drag my dad out of the bar. My dad would just be hammered drunk, and we'd make it back to the house. And he goes, I would sit there and watch my dad then both physically and verbally abuse my mom.
Mm-hmm.
He literally would beat my mom. And he said, so when I became 16, when I thought I was a man, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
guess what I started doing? He goes, I started drinking, getting drunk all the time, and I started physically and verbally abusing my mom.
Mm.
And you just kind of go, wow. But that's what he knew. That's what he thought a real man was supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
That's what he thought a father and a husband was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so as crazy as that sounds to some, that was his normal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, for men listening to this and understanding, man, what you're doing every day, the little things, you're creating that normal in your home. And it's a matter of trying to walk in that daily awareness
Mm-hmm.
of the influence and impact you have.
Man, and that's so hard too. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done. Just
Absolutely.
consistently just being aware. But I've heard Dr. Caroline Leaf say that it takes 62 days to create a habit. You know what I mean? So if you're pretty intentional about changing and being a good father, it is possible. It is, but it takes that
Absolutely.
level of awareness. I want to move on to the next question, John. How do you encourage men to face the wounds that they have suffered from their father?
I honestly, it's a pride thing.
Mm-hmm.
For so many of us as men, here's the biggest issue I run into is most men are angry and they can't even tell you why.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes back down to a father wound in many, many, many cases. And so just understanding, man, put your pride aside, put all that junk aside. You want to see real change, transformation, freedom. It's about forgiving your father. And no matter how bad he was, what he did, again, going back to connecting the dots and learning a little bit more about him, I think God can open your eyes to some things and help you understand why he was the way he was.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as forgiving your father, I mean, it's something, the anger, the wounds you will carry around the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it will impact your family, your relationship with your kids, your wife, and generations to come. Unless you're the one in your family that stands up and finally says, you know what? No more of that junk, no more of that stuff, that generational thing. I'm going to find forgiveness from my father. I'm going to go to a counselor. I'm going to get some help. I'm going to reach out to buddies. Ideally, I'm a huge advocate of Christian counseling. Mm-hmm. So I think we need a professional in most cases for us to really get through the process and figure it out. Mm-hmm. But it can also be as simple as, I recommend this all the time. It's a man who maybe the dad's still alive, and will still have nothing to do with him, or will still deny that he ever did anything wrong. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I tell guys in that situation, look, just sit down and write your dad a letter, right? Mm-hmm. Write him a letter, a physical letter written in pen, the old school way, not an email, but a letter, mm-hmm. and just prayerfully and thoughtfully walk through the letter and tell him, without personally attacking him, but tell him how he impacted you in your life and where he hurt you and all of the various things that you feel like you need to put on paper. And whether he accepts that letter and there's a change and it opens a door mm-hmm. to a conversation that can lead to redemption and reconciliation or not, it's still, in my opinion, and I've seen it happen with many, it's a therapy and a release that, wow, okay, now I truly can move forward in forgiving my father. Because there's a lot of guys out there that don't think they ever did anything wrong and need to be forgiven, mm-hmm. When in reality they do. But the only thing you can do as a man mm-hmm. is help fix you, right? Help get yourself healthy. You can't do it for your father or whoever else. You got to do it for you and your family.
Mm-hmm. No, and I agree with you 100%. That was some good information about that, writing of the letter, of course, because, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of guys out there, fathers, who don't believe that they did anything wrong, and mm-hmm. I don't know what that is. Do you think they actually forget? Because, I'll be real with you, my dad, he doesn't even remember some of the stuff, and it's like, what do you mean? What do you mean you don't remember? you know what I mean? So I wonder why that is.
Well, I think a big part of it is that it does go back to that normal. Mm-hmm. And as men, we have this tendency, well, I figured it out on my own. He mm-hmm. could do the same. That's why we don't have conversations with our dads about how to deal with finances. What's it like to be married? How to treat a woman. We don't have those conversations because there's this pride ego thing with all men. Well, that's just a rite of passage, which is so jacked up, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It's not a rite of passage not to know these things. A healthy, whole, godly father is going to have these real conversations with their son and walk them through to hopefully help them not make the mistakes they made. But I think there's a generation, especially of the older guys, that's, well, I figured it out. He can figure it out on himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it does go back to that. Well, this was my normal, and I'm okay. I'm a good man. So they think because it was their normal, again, not knowing what true normal is from a
Mm-hmm.
biblical standpoint, they think their normal was okay. So then they think, well, I didn't do anything to my son. It's the way I grew up,
Mm-hmm.
and I raised him the way I was raised. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And it's crazy that you said that because I didn't realize like I had a problem at all until it was pointed out by my own wife. She's like, the way you speak, the way you deal with, me and my and our daughter is not okay. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And it wasn't really till I started looking into myself to see that I was doing the exact things that my father did. The abuse, verbal abuse, the thinking that women were, for lack of better words, not as important as men, second-rate citizens, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's gonna shock a lot of people, but I'm being open and honest, because there's healing in that, and that's the way I treated my spouse and I treated my daughter, and I just thank God that He's allowed me to see where I've gone wrong.
Dude, and here's the thing, and this is what if guys hear nothing else, man, this is the bottom line.
Uh-huh.
You're not alone, and you're not the only one struggling with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate your candor, because here's what I see all the time is, until we start getting real and authentic and transparent and honest with one another as men,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to continue to think we are the only ones messed up, right? We're the only jacked up and flawed and imperfect guys. When you start having conversations with men and they see, wow, wait, you struggle with alcohol, wait, you struggle with porn, wait, you struggle with whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Throw your poison out there. It's amazing the guys that come back and go, wow, I thought I was the only one. And the relationships and friendships that can come around that, the real true band of brothers,
Mm-hmm.
man, that's what we need more of. We've got to have guys, and most guys don't have one or two really, really good friends that know all their junk,
Mm-hmm.
that can talk, that they can call at 3 a.m. when they're tempted to do something they shouldn't do, or they're on the ledge, and they need to be talked off. We've got to get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to get to the real, authentic conversations of what we as men all struggle with. And so, understanding that and knowing that,
Mm-hmm.
man, that's what it's all about. This conversation, you talking about that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
man, that's what every guy's going through. Many, many guys are struggling with the exact same thing because of this generational thing and how they were raised
Mm-hmm.
and what their fathers taught them.
No, and man, once again, you're so right on everything right there. I think, John, that's why there's such a high rate of suicide amongst men, is because they don't have these avenues. They don't have the guys, they put on a facade. I'm a tough guy. I don't cry. I don't need help. I don't need counseling. I don't need anything. I'm going to deal with it internally. And then 2 months down the road, I'm going to take a 45 in the wood shop and shoot myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I've had two lineman friends within the last 5 years who have committed suicide over beef with their spouse or ex-spouse over their son.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it's a shame, you know what I mean? Because they couldn't open up. I mean, all the signs were there. I mean, the drinking, the alcohol, the abuse, all these signs that were there, right? And they masked it as, I'm a lineman, you know what I mean? Or whatever. And next thing you know, they're pulling the trigger.
Yeah, and that's part of it too. Isolation is man's greatest enemy, right?
Oh yes,
I truly believe that, and I think, especially in the last year and a half of what we've been through with the pandemic and all just the chaos, it's only gotten worse because the enemy loves to get us isolated. When we're not in community and fellowship with other men, and again, real, authentic, no BS community where we can talk about these things the honest truth of what we're struggling with and what we're dealing with, when we're not doing that, the enemy gets us isolated, and he loves having us isolated. Man, it's like the picture I always get is the TV of the like National Geographic or one of the safaris over in Africa where you have all the gazelles running through, and you have the tiger laying low in the grass. And what does he do? He waits till that very last one that's kind of struggling or limping along. That's the end of the line, right? He's isolated, and that's the one he goes after many times. And I look at the enemy as the same way. Man, he wants us. He's going to do everything he can to get us isolated, make us feel shame, unworthiness, all that mess, because he wants us to go isolate. He wants us to not open up and share with other people and talk through these things because, man, he's got us exactly where he wants us at that point.
No, and I agree. You're 100% on that. I mean, obviously, in the wild, you watching predators and stuff like that, they don't go after the healthy or the ones that are in a pack at all. And that isolation, you're absolutely right. When I know for me, when I'm isolated, because a lot of times I would withdraw, right? And I don't even know why I would. It was just when I was dealing with stuff internally, I would withdraw away from my family. And I don't know if that was a defense mechanism to protect them because I didn't have the answers. And I, a lot of times internally, if I don't have the answers, I deal with my shame in anger. Okay?
Yeah.
So I lash out. So if you come to me and you ask me and I don't know, I'm going to be like, well, I'll just flash on you. You know what I mean? And I've realized that about myself. So I would isolate. And it wasn't until I started doing this work to where I started saying, okay, well, I'm isolating because why? Because I think I need to protect my family because I don't want to flash on them because I don't have. And it's just this whole different way of looking at things to where you got to change it. You know what I mean? You start seeing these different patterns in your life. So
it's a vicious cycle, bro. And it is. And here's the reality. And I've told my girls many a times, I do not know. I have. You know what? I don't know. But let's go Google it. Let's go find out together what the answer is. In a lot of cases, and some of it, they know. Here's another, wow moment for me in the journey. Many of the wow moments I've learned is, man, just being real and honest with my kids. I mean, my 21-year-old and 19-year-old, even my 15-year-old, they know my stuff now. They know I've struggled with depression and continue to. They know that. They know my history. They know my struggle with alcohol. They know those things about me. And what it's done in sharing my own struggles, it's taught them a couple of different things. It's taught them that Dad's not perfect, but, man, he is doing the very best he can, right? And he loves me more than anything. The second thing is it helps them understand and know they don't have to be perfect. There's not some benchmark that they've got to live up to of perfection and expectation from me that they're never going to attain. And that performance-based love is, man, it is such a tragedy.
Oh, it is.
And I see it everywhere with Dad. It's this, well, I wasn't quite as good as I thought I was going to be, so I'm going to live my life through my kids. There's, 100 different reasons for that type of mentality. But for us to be real and have open, honest conversations with our kids, they want to know about us. They have an innate curiosity to know what it was Dad was like when he was a kid, right? What was his favorite ice cream? Who were his best friends? They love those stories. I'll share a quick story. I was laying down with my girls several years ago when I'd started this journey, and we're laying down, and they just asked me, we were fixing to go to bed, and they asked me, hey, Dad, what was your first job? So I go to tell them the story about having to dress up as the rat at Chuck E. Cheese. And how I was hot. The head is like super big, and the kids are pulling on my tail, and I mean, it was just like crazy. They're laughing. 3 hours later, dude, we're still talking about my jobs and growing up and what my dad was like and the memories I had of him and all these different things. Our kids want to know that we're more than just Dad.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's funny that you said that because those are the stories that my kids ask over and over and over again. I mean, they'll even ask the same story. Like, yeah, can you tell us that time that you went camping and this and this and this, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And it's so true. They love those stories, you know. John, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the foundational tools you can equip men to become better fathers? What do you think about that?
You know what, brother? I had this conversation with a guy in an interview several years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and for us as a ministry, we try to build that band of brothers. It's community, right?
Community. Mm-hmm.
I think we learn from other men,
Mm-hmm.
and those of us who grew up fatherless, dude, that's the best way to do it. I tend to have long conversations with older men because they've been there, done that, right?
Yeah.
They've paid the dumb tax, if you will. They've
Mm-hmm.
made all the mistakes. So I could sit and listen to those grandfatherly types forever because of the stories and just the wisdom they have. So in just trying to create community, real community
Mm-hmm.
among other men, connecting other men, that's really a big part of what it is that we try to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important. Just as of 10 years ago, those fathers, we didn't have the internet, right,
Mm-hmm.
or 15 or whatever the number is, but we didn't have the internet to learn all these things. We had to literally try to figure out on our own or lean into other guys. Well, now, man, there's no excuse for dads not to figure some things out. You got podcasts, you got YouTube, you got Google, you got, shows like yours, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these different materials and resources out there. So there's really no excuse for us as dads not trying to be better dads or find the answers in ways that we need to be those better dads.
No, and I agree. I mean, there's so much information with the internet. Like you said, just podcasts to YouTube to, even us, we're teamed up with the National Father Initiative, and we have the Fathering in 15, which is touching base on 15 different topics, and they take 15 minutes, and you can access it anywhere, as long as you have a computer, you know what I mean? So there's really no excuse, like you said, and I think that's one of the positive things with the media and internet nowadays, that
Sure.
tool being there for us. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit, John, about your story. Okay, you said that you had a lot of monetary success, right? You're a successful salesperson. Now, with that monetary success, and you're trying to fulfill a void that was in you, right? When did you realize that it wasn't working? Because I know a lot of guys out there who work. They become workaholics, and they're trying to fill something inside of them. What was your Yahoo moment for that?
Dude, for me, it was a part of that time
Mm-hmm.
when God took me to this place of brokenness. I
Mm-hmm.
had for so many years tried it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And I had become successful in all of the measurements of the world, right?
Yes.
I was making really good money, traveling all over the country, had an unlimited expense account. I mean, I was like, wow, I've made it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. And yet, just like with so many men that I run into and coach, their home life is a wreck.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I think we've got to understand and come to change is we have this desire and determination to be the very best, whatever it is we do for a living, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's you're a janitor, a CEO, a sales guy, whatever, you want to be the very best. And yet we don't take that same mentality in being a father and a husband.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, why is that? Well, I think most of us, we grew up not having a model for us, so we don't know how, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to what we were talking about. Well, we got to lean in and figure it out. You got to get with other guys and figure it out. But for me, it was literally, I had attained all the monetary success I thought or believed I'd needed,
Mm-hmm.
And yet my home life was a wreck. And so, it was finally, and I tell people, I think my full surrender was in that moment to God,
Mm-hmm.
and fully surrendering for the first time in my life that I had this wound and I had to get it figured out. I had to figure it out because of my behavior and all the things that I was doing. I knew were unhealthy and weren't right,
Mm-hmm.
but part of that was just thinking that if I could achieve everything on a monetary basis, that everything else would fall in line. And that's one of the biggest lies that the enemy tells us,
Mm-hmm.
is that we, if we do that, then we're good to go, when in reality, it doesn't matter how much wealth you have financially,
Mm-hmm.
you're always going to want more. It's never enough. It's never enough. I know very wealthy people
Mm-hmm.
that continue to try to strive to make more and more and more money, and their home life and their marriage is just an absolute wreck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. You got to find that balance there for sure. Um, and then just chasing after that buck. That's one thing I caught myself doing. Is just chasing after the next storm, or trying to make, if I could just attain this, if I could just make this amount of money this year, you know what I mean? If I can make 200K this year, I'll be fine. And you're absolutely right. It's not enough. It never is enough. You know what I mean?
Well, and part of that too is most men, and again, this is partly generational.
Mm-hmm.
We grow up thinking our only responsibility is to provide financially.
Yes.
We don't think that we're supposed to be a part of what's going on at home. We're supposed to, we're thinking our wives are doing all that, raising the kids and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Well, I tell you, one of the most valuable pieces of advice I got years ago was there's a book out there called The 5 Love Languages by
Yes.
Gary Chapman.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can tap in and figure out what your wife's love language is, bro.
Dude, tell me about it.
That's a game changer, man. And so many guys don't know about it. And I didn't know about it until I was probably in my 40s, right?
Mm-hmm.
In early 40s when I started this journey. And so if you can tap into that with your wife,
Mm-hmm.
it's a game changer in a marriage, man. And that goes back to like my wife's a service. So if I'm working around the house, if I'm helping clean dishes and wash clothes and all that,
Mm-hmm.
we're good to go. It's when I'm not doing that, because that's her love language,
Mm-hmm.
that things get a little crazy. And I'm not the best at it, bro. I'm
No.
not. I still mess up and fail at it. But I know it, and I know what I need to be doing, and I do the best I can.
And that's funny because I read that book probably about 10 years ago, right? And we put it away, and I completely forgot about it. And as we grow older, as a couple and stuff like that, you change. You start to change. Well, it wasn't until recently that I started really looking into what my wife's love language was and what mine was. And, man, it's funny because I was doing it completely wrong and she was doing it completely wrong. Like, the love language that I have is touch. I like to be physical touched, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would do that to her. That's not her love language.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? She likes words of affirmation.
Yeah.
And for me, since I was always taught, as a young boy and stuff like that, to kind of verbally abuse, you know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? And just being harsh with my words and stuff like that. I was destroying her, literally killing her. Like,
yeah.
I was like closing off. It's like having an oxygen hose. Dr. Emerson Eggerichs talks about love and respect, right? And he talks about how your wife has this oxygen hose. And when you're not showing her love, you literally are closing the hose on her and you're not giving her any oxygen. She's suffocating and dying. And that's what I was doing with my spouse. But unbeknownst to me, I thought I was doing the right thing because I was, showing her how I like to be loved.
Yeah, and I think that's what most of us do. We default thinking that that's what our wives want, or there's this idea out there that because our wives are tender and loving and caring, that it's only affection,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a lie. I mean, there's like 5, right? There's 5 gifts, and women are just. It's interesting, and again, you talk about a father. I have more women reach out to me than I do men,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them have struggled in their own marriages because of their father's story and the expectations that they've put on their husband.
Mm-hmm.
As a result, and some of them are expectations that husband doesn't have a chance of attaining, right?
Yeah.
And or the abuse and distrust of men. I mean, you talk about things to unpack and all that, especially with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But even for a man to understand a little more about his wife's relationship with her father, it's an important part of him understanding the full picture and what it is she needs and what her love language is all about.
Mm-hmm. No, and I agree. I mean, once you start figuring out their history and their family of origin, I mean, that unlocks a big mystery right there. You can start seeing, and it's funny because one of the things I always like to tell fathers is that when we treat our spouse a certain way, we're teaching our daughters, correct, what a man teaches, or how a man should actually treat his wife, okay? And they're going to look for that in another man, right? Well, that holds true to where women, a lot of the times, will marry somebody who is like their father.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was interesting, and I just want to share a story with you real quick. I haven't drank in over, I think, like 11 years now, okay? And the big turnaround for that for me was I was one of these guys who I'd come home, I'd drink a six-pack of Shinerbach coming out of Texas because I was working in West Texas on the power lines out there. And I'd slam down a six-pack on the road, and then I'd have 2 miniatures of Maker's Mark. Well, I would come home, I'd go in the back door, because my wife, being a very good wife, would have a six-pack already in the refrigerator for me, right? So I didn't want her to know that I was drinking more, so I would go to the back, and I would open up a beer real quick, and I acted like I was drinking that one, and that was the smell. Little did she know I was, drinking a six-pack and a couple of miniatures. Yeah. Well, long story short, we had 15 acres of alfalfa behind us, and I'd be, on the barbecue underneath the gazebo cooking and stuff, and I'd be slamming miniatures and throwing them over the fence and stuff like that. And came down to it to when irrigation season started. One of the new neighbors who bought that property showed up with 5-gallon bucket of Maker's Mark filled. And my wife looks at me and she just shakes her head, and I'm like, whatever, kind of ashamed, And she comes up to me afterwards. She's like, look, I'm not going to tell you not to drink. I'm not going to be that wife. But if you're okay with your daughter, and we only had our daughter at the time, and she was young. She was like 3. She's like, if you're okay with your daughter being comfortable with that smell and looking for that in other men, then that's on you. And
wow.
Brother, that hit me, and I stopped, and I've never had another drink since that day.
Your wife is a stud, bro. I love that story because, dude, I mean, that if that's not a gut punch, what is, right?
Oh yeah, no, it was it was a big eye opener. You know what I mean? And I'll never go back to drinking like that. And I felt better, honestly.
We interviewed a Dr. Meg Meeker who.
Oh yeah, Meg. Yep. Yeah,
dude, I love her because she's a female telling men exactly what it's all about, and she doesn't do it lightly. She's got the experience and the background and expertise to say it and mean it and know that it's true. And one of the conversations I had with her, I'll never forget, speaking with daughters and fathers, is she said, John, many times she's a pediatrician by trade, and she said many times I'd have a 13, 14-year-old girl come in my office, and she said originally it was like 16, then it was 15, 14, 13, where these girls were coming in and they were sexually active. It was getting younger and younger. And she said, it's weird because I had more than one. There were probably a handful of 13, 14-year-old girls who would come into my office, and I would give them a physical, and before they left, they would turn around and say, hey, Doc, can you write me a prescription? And she'd say, well, honey, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. And the girl would say, please just write me a prescription. And at the bottom of it, put cannot have sex. She said, John, what was going on is these young girls were having sex. It wasn't physically or emotionally pleasurable, but it was the only affection they were getting from any kind of man. They weren't getting any positive fatherly affection from their dad. And this was their permission slip to take to Johnny to say, hey, Johnny, I can't have sex anymore.
Wow.
And that, as a guy with 3 daughters, and I'm early on in this journey, probably 8 years ago of the 10-year journey, and I'm sitting in front of her interviewing her, and that just hit me. I was like, wow, that's the repercussions of us as men not loving our daughters and not them knowing that they're cherished, that they're valued, that they're loved.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was, yeah, there's several of those stories throughout the journey, bro. And that was one I remember going back home and going, okay, honey, talking to my wife, I've got to figure this thing out and let my girls know that they are loved and that there's nothing they can do to make me love them any more or any less.
And wow, yeah, just stories like that are just, if that doesn't get you, nothing will. I mean,
Sure.
Wow. I mean, just me having one daughter who's, a teenager now and, 15. And I'm just so thankful that I've been able to regain the trust in her that I had lost, just being on the road. I was gone for the majority of her life, and it's been a long journey, but it's just through patience, watching my words, and being the man that I say I am to her, and seeing that consistency day in and day out. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Dude, to that point, I think you hit on a point that every man needs to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a lesson I learned along the way. Even when we mess up, even when we say something we shouldn't say, all those things, for us to have a conversation with our kids,
mm-hmm.
and I do it in a private manner. I'll go upstairs with my daughter, just me and her, when I've lost my temper, said something I shouldn't have said, or acted in a way I shouldn't have acted. And I tell them, look, I am so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I was having a bad day, or tell them, be honest,
mm-hmm.
Why you lost your temper, whatever. Be honest and just say, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me?
Mm-hmm.
And our kids are so forgiving, right? They're a lot more forgiving than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And that does two things. That helps your kids see that you're not perfect, because
mm-hmm.
they're going to find out, right?
Right.
None of us are. But it also helps them understand and know they don't have to be perfect, right?
Yes.
And so in those conversations, in those intimate apologies, sometimes tear-filled apologies, man, that has taken my relationships with my daughter to another level. And believe me, I am a pretty jacked up dude, right? And
mm-hmm.
imperfect and flawed still. I still mess up. So I still have those conversations. I don't think I have to have them as many times as I did before, but it's in those conversations where we can apologize and ask them for forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that does so much for our kids.
It does, and it's like a two-part too, because when they see that you can be, that you're responsible, right? One of the core values here at the Show Up Dad Foundation is being committed, responsible, and intentional. And being responsible is being able to say, hey, I messed up. Whether that be at work or at your home with your children or your wife, be like, look, I'm sorry, I messed up, I'm not perfect. And what that does, that I've seen in my life, is that it takes away that edge, where they think, like a performance-based household we're talking about, right, earlier. It takes away that edge to where they don't got to be perfect. Because
and they know that they can come to you and admit
yes,
when they messed up, right?
Exactly. And children have that uncanny ability of getting your attention when they need it, whether it be good or bad. You know what I mean? So if they can trust you to call you and say, hey, Dad, I drank some beer or whatever. I don't want to drive. I'm here alone. You know what I mean? Or whatever. Can you come pick me up?
Yeah.
That builds that trust to where you can go and get them, versus them, saying, oh, my dad's going to kill me. I'm going to jump in the car with this person. And then, later on you find out that they were in a car with a drunk driver. You know what I mean? How many times has that happened? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All because they didn't trust you and they were afraid of what you were going to say.
Yeah.
I wanted to read you this quote. It's James Carroll, okay? And he said that the curse of fatherhood is distance, and that good fathers spend their lives trying to overcome it. In what ways have you seen fathers struggle with physical or emotional distance, John?
Yeah. Are you talking about as it pertains to their own family or their fathers?
Their own family.
Yeah, I think there's so much that can be talked about there.
Mm-hmm.
With emotionally distant father, and I had this question posed to me years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What's harder, the father that's wounded you that's still alive, or the one that's dead? And honestly, in my own case, I was like, well, mine's dead. I don't have that daily reminder of him, right? I can forgive him and move on. It's the dad that's still alive that denies he ever wounded, denies he ever did anything wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So I think in understanding, if you have a father that's still distant, or if you're a distant father to your kids themselves, man, it's never too late, bro. It's never too late to ask for forgiveness, to start again, if you will, to forgive your own father, right? But from a father who is distant emotionally or physically in the family, you know, our kids see us and they're watching us. They're a lot more observant than we think. And so many of us as dads, especially the divorced dads, they think that when they have their time with their kids, that they've got to go spend all this money and do all these crazy things and just make it a blast every time they're around them. Man, our kids just want to be with us, right? And they want to know that we want to be with them. So whether it's reading a book, grabbing an ice cream cone, whatever, it's making the most of the time that you're there, right? Not rehashing the past or looking back, I should have been this, I should have been that, or I haven't been a good father. Put all that trash aside. Man, start today. Every day is a new opportunity to be a great dad, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes back to those conversations. It's if you've been the distant dad, physically or emotionally, have those conversations with your kids, man. The real, honest conversations of, look, I've messed up. I've messed up. I've done this. I've done that. Whatever, and walk back through some of your own stories with your father and how you've learned it and what you've done. And again, in those stories, I think our kids start to see that we're human, and they start to have a compassion and an understanding about why we are the way we are. You know, if they hear a story about your dad leaving you when you were young and you're trying to figure everything out, a lot of the mistakes that you make, your kids will see and understand, well, man, my dad didn't have a dad. He's winging this thing, right? So, again, whether emotionally or physically distant, there's just in those honest conversations with our kids, man, they can do so much. Just put the pride aside, put the man up, suck it up, figure it out on your own aside, and just have an honest conversation with your girls or your boys.
I like that. No, that's some good advice right there, John. I always like to do some stuff here, you know, coming down the last, 20 minutes or so. I have questions that come in from our audience. So if you don't mind, I'd like to just read them off to you and pick your brain a little bit, John, if you don't mind. Okay.
You bet.
Well, let's see here. This one came in. Children often believe that life events happen or are caused by something that they did or thought they should have done. Did you ever think that the tragic loss of your father was ever a fault of yours? And how did you overcome that or reconcile it in your life? That's a question that came in from the audience.
Yeah, so great question. A part I didn't tell you about in my story, about 2 weeks before my dad killed himself, I actually found the gun that he killed himself with.
Oh, wow.
I was, again, 11 years old. I was digging around in his closet looking for something, and I stumbled upon this sawed-off shotgun. And within about 30 seconds, I'm just still kind of in awe because I'm a young man. I see this gun, right? And within about 30 seconds, I hear this voice over the top of me. Son, don't you ever tell anybody you found this. Now get out of here. And so once he committed suicide, man, as an 11-year-old boy, kids already believe that a lot of things that happen to their families, whether their mom and dad get divorced or whatever the circumstances, that there's something they could have done, or it was because of them that this happened.
Yes.
Well, you take and stack that story of me finding the gun he killed himself with 2 weeks before he did it. I had this incredible guilt and shame that if I would have only said something to somebody, if I'd only told my mom, those type of things. And so, I came to understand, and the journey of all of it is people are going to do what they're going to do, right? I think even if I had told somebody about the gun, my dad would have found another way, or he'd have found another gun, right? Yeah. If he wanted to do what he did, he would have found a way to do it. And I think what's important here is, especially for those that are maybe divorced, and with circumstances and tragedies that come up in the family, is to make sure to have conversations. Because I tell divorce dads this all the time. Make sure you're having the conversation with your kids, and they know this has absolutely nothing to do with them. This is an issue between me and their mom. It has nothing to do with them, because kids will take that pain on.
Mm-hmm.
They'll take that load and that burden on thinking it's something they did. So we've got to have those conversations with our kids so they understand and realize it's not their fault. And so for me, it was really God. It was Him walking me through that and helping me understand, you know what, it had nothing to do with me. Mm-hmm. My dad was going to figure out a way to do it one way or the other. So yeah, but that's something I carried around for a long, long time. And I even carried around the shame and guilt of thinking people, as I was walking around the small town I grew up in, that people were looking at me and whispering, "Hey, there's the kid whose dad killed himself." So getting beyond that and understanding, man, God loves me just the way I am. All the faults and all the scars and everything and all my mess ups, man, God loves me. God's grace is bigger than I ever imagined it was.
No, that's awesome, John. One of the things that a friend of mine always says is, when you know whose you are, you'll know who you are.
Yep.
And it's so true. Once you realize that who you belong to and whose child you really are and what He truly says about you, that shame can't exist. One of the things that shame does is it likes to thrive in darkness, right? Yep. So it hates being exposed. So once we expose that shame and, you start working on it, it can't exist anymore.
Yeah, dude. And I think, to your point, too, a lot of guys are. They walk around because, again, either growing up fatherless or having an abusive father or whatever. You kind of asked this question a while ago, but what I would recommend, too, for men, and again, put the pride down, put the ego down, put all that mess aside, and find an older man that can literally mentor you on manhood. There's a lot of young men out there that don't know how to be a man, doesn't know what it looks like to be a man, right? A godly man. And so to ask a man, an older man, hey, man, can you just kind of mentor, can we grab lunch once a month? And those type of things. And you find that man that's going to speak all the stuff into you that your dad didn't, that's going to encourage you, that's going to help you understand that you do have what it takes to be a man, because that's what every man wants. That affirmation, man, that's a game changer itself. Just finding that man that can help mentor you as both a man, husband, and father.
Absolutely, and there's not enough mentors out there, you know what I mean? But you are truly a mentor, John, and I just want to thank you for coming on here and just sharing your wonderful story with us, John, and just being so open with us. And I know this is going to bless so many people out there, especially all the hardworking fathers out there that are providing for their family, Dude,
I appreciate you, brother. I thank you for letting me come on and share a little bit of my story, and after it's all said and done, I say it all the time, dude. I am just blessed to be on the bus God's driving. It is all God.
Amen. I agree, brother. John, can I have you give our listeners where they can get a hold of you? You know what I mean? If they're looking for you? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we've got, our website is The Father Effect, thefathereffect.com, and you can find me all social media, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, everything by that name. So that's the best way.
Awesome. Once again, John, thank you so much for coming on the show. God bless.
Thank you, my brother. You bet.